Hello everyone, this is Jotto, and welcome back to another deck tech. Now, I was debating doing vintage this time round, but there's only two more vintage tournaments, so I thought, people aren't going to get that much use out of it, so instead we're covering another standard deck. So this time we're covering ponies. Pony Aggro, getting its namesake from Nightmare Stallion. Now, the last two decks I covered were a mid-range deck and a pure aggro deck. This is another aggressive deck, but it's very different to the Hermelian list that I covered before. That's much more of a kind of like poke, 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 burst, whereas this is more of a conventional aggressive deck. And it happens to be one of the best performing decks in the game right now. Now, the main card this is built around, it's like, why Corruption Dominion? Nightmare Stallion. So, 3 mana, 1 Dominion, 1 Corruption for its levels. It's an invocation, which means it comes in as a spell and you have to meet certain conditions to invoke it, and when it's invoked, it becomes a creature that can attack instantaneously, so basically a creature with Swift. When Nightmare Stallion enters the field, you select a hero's deck, look for 3 non-primary cards with different names and put them under Stallion. This is usually your own deck. When a hero plays a card with the same name as a card under Nightmare Stallion, invoke Nightmare Stallion. What is it? A 3/4 with 3 speed. This card is amazing. It does actually has 3 primary uses in this deck. The most obvious is it gives you a 3/4, 3 speed with Swift for 3 mana. It's not often usable on turn 4, but you still get it for 3 mana, so that's incredibly powerful on curve, especially in a color combo that simply doesn't have access to 3 speed creatures that easily. The second primary usage is to put cards from your deck underneath it so that when it dies, those cards go to the graveyard. And the third usage is to thin out your deck. So every time you play a Stallion, you thin out your deck more and more and more, so you're less likely to draw bad cards in the mid to late game when you're trying to, finish the game, which helps a lot. So, what's the graveyard engine? Now, there are 2 graveyard targets in this deck, Shamhar and Woodland Revenant. Shamhar is a insanely powerful card. 3 mana, 2 levels, although that never comes up in this deck because he's not uncastable, but it's close. It's very difficult to get double corruption. 3/4, 3 speed, legendary, unstoppable. Sacrifice a slave, put a Might Emblem on Shamhar, but that almost never comes up. This is his primary effect you want. 1 mana, sacrifice a slave, put him back into play. That's amazing. So what you can do is use Nightmare Stallion, put Shamhar underneath it. If Stallion doesn't die, you probably win. And if Stallion does die, you now have a Shamhar underneath the Stallion that goes to the graveyard. So you've basically drawn a card. So that's an incredibly powerful usage, but you only want 1. Woodland Revenant is one that I've gone back and forth on playing, but it has its uses. It's completely uncastable in this deck, so don't even consider it. You can't play it. However, whenever you have 10 or less life, if you lose life or dealt damage, you can invoke it from your graveyard, which means if you're on 10 or less and you get attacked, you get a 2/1 3 speed. Now, the opportunity cost of playing this in your deck isn't actually that bad, because it's only 1 card in the deck, you can divine it away easily, and once you play a Stallion, you're at no risk of drawing the card ever again. The reason I've gone back and forth on playing it is because the cost of playing it in your deck, almost 0. But it doesn't actually come up that often, and that's the issue. It usually only comes up in aggro mirror matches when you're racing, but that doesn't seem to happen very often. So it's not often that useful. But the cost of putting it in your deck is so low that even those tiny uses sometimes make it worth playing. So it's only 1, and honestly, I would encourage you to play it. See if you like having the Revenant in the deck or not, and then kind of feel it out from there. Because with Stallion, it's very low cost to play this in your deck. So, on to the rest of the deck, the primary use of the deck. This is a 2-color aggro deck with Dominion, which means you have 2 1-drops in 2 different colors, and then use Slave Gladiator to bridge the gap. So we'll start with Spoiled Aristocrat. 1 mana, Dominion, 3/1, 2 speed, can't attack or block unless you played another creature. Not summon creature, play a creature, that's important. 3/1, high stats for a 1-drop. It's a bit vulnerable to ping effects, of which there are many, but it's still what you want in terms of 1-drops. It's one of the best 1-drops in the game, and playing less than 4 is slightly foolhardy when you're trying to be that aggressive. The other 1-drop is Zombie Legionnaire. 2/2, 1 speed, corruption, that's it. Vanilla, 2/2, good 1-drop. There's almost no tricks with this in this deck at all. Just sacrifice outlets, that's it. There's no real tricks with this. Basically, you try and get it on turn 1. Late game, you want to be using Stallion to get rid of these 1-drops. If you get a second Stallion, start getting these out of your deck so you don't draw them again. Legionnaire is worse late game in most situations, but if they have a lot of pings, then Aristocrat is, of course, the worst choice. Now, these are bridged together with Slave Gladiator. It's a 0-cost, 2-level card that has Slave, so it can't attack or block unless you have more non-slave creatures. 2/1, 2 speed. Pretty bad body, but it's free, essentially, and it means you can go Aristocrat turn 1, and then turn 2, go a level, and go Zombie Legionnaire, Slave Gladiator. Slave Gladiator is the reason why those curves work. So very, very nice card that helps bridge those early games, and it can also be used to sacrifice to Shamhar late game, so every Slave Gladiator you draw becomes a Shamhar. So that's a significant upgrade. You get a 1-mana Shamhar instead of your slave. That's great. Then we're going to move on to the 2-drops. So we've got Death Curse Shaman and Eternal Servants, which is realistically a 3-drop in this deck. Oops. Death Curse Shaman, 1/1, 2 speed. When it dies, you can either Noxious Fume something, -2/-2, or they lose 2 life. Both of these come up. Primarily the first one, but the second effect can be used to burn them out. Solid 2-drop. Really annoying early game because it trades with 3/3s. Great card. Then we've got Eternal Servants, which is realistically a 2-mana creature, but it can be played as a 1-mana 2-level card. 1/1, 3 speed. When you play it, you can play a copy from your deck or graveyard, and when they leave the field, you gain 1 life. Leave the field, I think this is the only case of no matter what, this effect will happen in the game. You can't get around it, aside from Stupefy, I guess. So it's incremental life gain. Not a powerful effect, but you're always going to get it. And that actually can be pretty handy. But the main thing for this is you get 2 actual creatures for 2 mana, and they have 3 speed, helps with spread. And the reason it's important they're 2 actual creatures is because they work with Flesh Sculptor. Flesh Sculptor being a 2 mana, 2-level creature, 2/2, 2 speed. Whenever a non-summon creature you control dies, you summon a Legionnaire. So this works wonders with Death Curse Shaman when you're trading, and Eternal Servants. So you can go Eternal Servants into Flesh Sculptor, get 2 zombies, and trade, hopefully, with something. However, Flesh Sculptor's primary usage isn't just trading, although that is a big deal. It also synergizes quite well with later skill shrines, etc. Its number 1 usage is you get 2 of them, they protect each other, they protect your board. You play them in pairs, and they're absolutely amazing. But even just having Flesh Sculptors on their own can be handy, but if you play them in pairs, they really, really help against board wipes and help you maintain board control in general, especially when you've got the hero power, which we're actually going to cover at the end, because you need to see the rest of the deck to kind of understand it and its uses a bit more. Works really well with sacrifice outlets. Then the final creature, is Raging Minotaur. Now, Raging Minotaur is my particular take. I think I'm the only person playing Raging Minotaur in their version. This type of deck is actually more flexible in terms of its card numbers, etc. than you'd think. Raging Minotaur is a 3 mana, 2-level creature. 4/5, 1 speed, it's a slave. And beginning of your turn, you take 2 damage, but it has 3 speed on your turn. Now, the primary usage for this is just a big dude. It's actually quite difficult to kill 5 health creatures on curve for rage decks in particular, and it having 3 speed really helps with beating down when you're ahead on tempo. The problem with Raging Minotaur is it's really, really bad when you're behind. But when you're ahead, you play Minotaur, and it's really hard to, combat it. Stallion is better, but you can only play 4. you can only play 4 stallions, so Raging Minotaur is my kind of answer to this extra spot on curve. If you're not playing Dominion, if you're instead playing Mono Corruption, you can use Shamhars and such, and we'll talk a little bit about that with Silverthorn Promenade later and what you can do with color shifting. Now, for the spells, we've got simple ones, Fumes, 1 mana, 1 level, -2/-2, solid removal spell, one of the best in the game in fact, helps with combat as well, not just solid removal. Symbol of Decay, 2 mana, 1 level, put a weakness emblem on a creature, and then that creature's controller decays 3 cards, so 3 cards go to the graveyard. If you play boost it for 1 mana extra, you get an Enchained Soul for every creature decayed this way. And it's instant. That's important. Instant is something Corruption doesn't really have access to, so Symbol of Decay is very useful in that regard, but its main important usage, as there is a bike in the background, but anyway, its main important usage is that Enchained Soul, because Enchained Souls from Symbol of Decay can be sacrificed for Shamhar. That is a huge, huge deal. It also really messes up attacks, because you can symbol something and then immediately use the Enchained Soul to chump block. Very, very powerful card. Very underestimated by quite a few people. It's a very, very nice card. And the final spell, aside from, well, Stallion is technically a spell, but it's more of a creature, is Primal Battle. Primal Battle, 1 mana, 2 level, ancient card, so you can play it as a shrine if you need to. Action, choose an enemy creature, an ally creature, they fight each other, basically. Deal their attack damage to each other. Now, this works with on-hit effects like Deadly, so be mindful of that, but its primary usage is using your usually bigger creatures to, well, attack and kill stuff. However, if it trades and you've got a Flesh Sculptor, you get an extra zombie, but Primal Battle on Stallion will usually kill something, on a Shamhar will usually kill something, and same goes for Minotaur, and Death Curse Shaman will usually trade because of that -2, -2. Very, very, very useful in this kind of deck. It's also a 1 mana spell, which is a nice activator for Stallion. Now, the hero power, Enoch. Enoch's hero power for 2 mana, 2 levels, although you're going to get 2 levels by that point easily. 2 mana, 2 turn cooldown, very short cooldown. You sacrifice a creature, every other creature you control gets +1/+1 until end of turn, and you gain 1 life for each creature you have. Life gain sometimes comes up, but this thing's primary usage is twofold. Sacrificing things like Death Curse Shamans, and giving you a huge board-wide buff that gives you extra damage. Now, part of the reason it gives you so much extra damage is because you can play a creature from hand and then sacrifice that one, so you don't actually lose any damage on board when you go for it. Enoch is primarily used to finish the game, but it can be used for tempo in some situations, but it's primarily used for ending the game. Quite a powerful hero. Over time, through the game's history, Enoch started off not being played, and over time, as better creatures have been released and better interactions with sacrifice effects have been made, it's slowly become better and better and better until now it's one of the primary useful aggro heroes and has been for well, at least a year by this point. It's no longer a gimmicky hero. It's actually a very, very good hero. Also has some of the best artwork in the game. Just side effect there. Last, but certainly not least, we have the Shrines. Now, the Shrines are an interesting setup here. You've got your basic shrines as usual. 1 Valley, of course. 4 Silverthorn Promenade. After all, you're playing the 2 color, and it helps a little bit with your color fixing, and more importantly, this extra effect here is better than you think. Being able to pay 2 mana and 2 life, put a Might Emblem on a creature you control. Instant speed, that's important, is very useful in this color combo. It really messes with combat, and it actually helps with lethal sometimes as well. So actually quite useful shrine. We don't use it for any color shenanigans in this deck, but when we go over cards you could play, I'll detail those a little bit. Besides that, 2 skill shrines. Stronghold Metropolis helps with sacrificing for draw with slaves, but also helps with sacrificing Death Curse Shaman to get like a 3 mana Fumes that draws a card. So that's quite handy. Can also help you cycle through the bad cards when you get them, so it's okay. It's not at its strongest I've ever seen it in a deck, but it has its utility. Haunted Cemetery is also very handy. Helps you keep velocity by effectively just giving you a zombie. It's a one mana zombie if you can kill something on 2 turn cooldown. Helps build that velocity without losing cards. Generally in a game you want to get 2 or 3 zombies out of this on average, and it's very, very nice. The reason we play 2 of each is because Nightmare Stallion works wonders with these shrines. Nightmare Stallion, you can put a shrine underneath him and then immediately play that shrine to activate it instantly. Now, this works best with skill shrines, but you can also use it with Silverthorn Promenade. And Silverthorn Promenade still has a fairly useful feature. Now, you are going to lose a card to do this, and you're not going to gain a hero power, but if the game doesn't go that long, a single use Might Emblem is sometimes as good as a skill shrine was going to be, so it can actually be very nice there. And as I said, importantly, you get an instant Stallion. The only other way of activating Stallion faster is using Slave Gladiator, because you can play Stallion on turn 4 and then play a Slave Gladiator and they'll activate it immediately and you can attack. Learning how to use Stallion is the big part of keeping the win rate of this deck high. Learning its activations, learning a few tricks about it, like you can only invoke 1 creature at once, which means if you have multiple Stallions, you want them with different methods of activation so you can do them in succession. So if you have, say, 2 Stallions in hand, you want to play a Stallion, fetch a Stallion with that one, put it underneath, so next turn when you play the other Stallion, it activates the first one, and then you can play something else to activate your second Stallion. Sounds confusing, but this is the kind of stuff you need to think about while playing this card. And late game, it starts filtering out your deck, which is super nice. Now, in terms of cards you can think about, since I'm playing Raging Minotaur, but that's definitely not normal, you can increase Primal Battle's count if you wish, and you can also fiddle around a bit with things like Fate's Touch, which is very nice for a combat trick, and you draw a card, which is very, very handy. It's a nice removal spell as well. And if you're willing to figure out some color shenanigans, because you can use Silverthorn Promenade to switch your Dominion level to a Corruption level, and then if you get a second Promenade, you can switch it back, then you gain access to the ever-powerful Tombs of the Damned with infinite value and the zombies, and Charles, which is an incredible creature right now, ever since the rework on rulings, which now means that he, well, when he dies, and then Chain Soul spawns, which is insane, by the way, but anyway. So, he's very powerful, and these are the 2 reasons to play the mono corruption version, but if you're willing to fiddle around with some shrines, then maybe you can get it work with a Stallion deck. I personally don't like the inconsistency caused by this, but it can be very good. But anyway, that's my rundown on my particular build of Stallion Aggro, or Pony Aggro as people call it. But as for now, it's been Jotto. If you want to ask any questions, put it in the comment section below or come and chat with me on Discord. But that's me signing off.